The recording. Okay.
Yeah, I would request everyone to switch on their cameras if it's okay.
Would you like to introduce her or should I?
You should do that.
Okay, all right. Apologies for the delay, everybody. Welcome to session number 2C, titled Heritage, Tourism and Material Culture of the Young Folklorist Conference, titled Transitions and Transformations in South Asian Folklore, Problems, Perspectives and Prospects. We are really glad to have all of you here for the final paper presentation session of the day. To chair this session, we have with us Dr. Fayaz Ahmed. Dr. Fayaz Ahmed currently serves as an assistant professor and local head of the Department of Studies and Research in English at Rani Chennamma University, Karnataka. With a decade of teaching experience under his belt, he has established himself as a seasoned educator committed to academic excellence. Dr. Ilkal's scholarly pursuits extend beyond the classroom, as evidenced by his active participation in numerous national and international conferences where he has presented his research findings. Additionally, he has contributed extensively to academia by recording his lectures on a diverse range of topics, enriching scholarly discourse within his fields. His area of expertise and interests span various domains, including folklore, digital humanities, research methodology, and translation studies. We are privileged to have you here with us, sir. Over to you now. Sir, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Meghal Kaki, for introducing me to the August gathering. So I have been asked to chair the session. The first speaker will be Aipan Art of Kumaon, Past, Present, and Future by Dr. Reetika Negi. Is she there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, okay, fine. Yeah, and then the second speaker will be on who owns folk music, exploring the ownership of Assamese folk music by Anandita Bora. And then the third topic is balancing tradition and trend, policy and method dynamics in Indian folklore, promotion for cultural heritage tourism. Fourth one, curating the folk, national museums and reconstruction of cultural identity. So now I request Reetika Negi ma'am to give her presentation. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. I'll share my screen so that it is. The screen is visible, right?
Yeah, it's visible.
Yeah. So I'll just dive into the presentation. So my paper basically it aims to look at the current status of Aipan, which is a traditional ritualistic art form of Kumaon in Uttarakhand. And in recent years, we've seen that it has undergone a transformation, and it is no longer restricted to religious rituals or to festivals. It has now turned into a hugely successful folk art form, and a lot of products in different materials and different mediums are being produced, and there are a lot of groups and individuals who are creating these products, and they're making a good earning through these products. So my paper basically looks at the changes which the ritual has undergone, and also raises issues pertaining to the performative nature of the art and how it affects the women's identity, the benefits social media and new technologies have had for it, other issues that might arise, including intellectual property rights and issues with traditional knowledge systems, and the idea of misuse of such art forms, or often we see cheap knockoffs of traditional art forms being sold for way cheaper than the original art forms, which then harms these artists. So all of these align with the sustainability development goals of the United Nations. So these are the aspects that I'll be looking at in my paper. So this is a brief overview. So first, what is the ritual? The first section deals with what the ritual is, what are its elements, materials used, techniques, basically the traditional form of the ritual, then the socio-cultural and religious significance of the ritual. And the second section looks at the decline, what causes are, we can think of what causes we can think for the decline of this ritual, and its revitalization, and the role that new technologies, and especially internet and social media, has played in the revival and the revitalization of this art form. And another part of it is governmental endorsement and commercialization of Aipan. So that forms, it can be a whole paper on itself, the way this is a huge industry now. And then it also looks at, we compare what the new products are versus to the traditional form of the art form. And then the last section looks at the issues and challenges. So the background and other researchers. So mostly for me, when I was looking for research papers, journal articles mostly, so I found that most of them are currently focused on the commercialization aspect and how it can be adapted into maybe textiles, designs for textiles and for clothes and home decor items, daily use items. So these are the major kinds of articles and researches, studies that you can find. Then you have a lot of information on the internet, on a lot of websites which are dedicated to the region, to the art form. You find a few magazine articles. And one study that I found very interesting, because I wanted to focus on the show, on it's not just on the art itself, but on how it reflects the changes within the society and within the culture, how the society is changing. So one notable study that I found is from 2018. So, IP College, New Delhi, IP College for Women. So they did a survey and a study where they looked at the women in Delhi, like the migrant populations, women from Uttarakhand who live in Delhi now, how familiar are they with the art form and all of that. So that research was probably the only one that I could find which actually looks into this aspect, the socio-cultural changes it has undergone and how it reflects the society. So what is Aipan? So it is a traditional ritual art form, and women are the ones who traditionally have practiced it, and it is done throughout the year. It marks two things that it marks is the rituals and the festivals and the religious ceremonies that they hold. So it kind of codifies all of that information through all of its different designs, different patterns, and all of those. And the second thing that it marks is important life events. So from the birth to the death of a person, each of these life events, major life events, they have different, the ritual Aipan that we have for them, they are different. So you can actually see the importance of all these events and which rituals are important, culturally important for the people. And traditionally, the art form was drawn on the walls and the floors of the traditional homes, which were made from mud, wood, and stones. And it served two purposes traditionally. One was the rituals. It was a big part of the religious ceremonies. And second was the decorative embellishment of homes. So in recent times, I have felt this myself, like, you would see the practice of the art reducing for a number of reasons, but in the past, especially in the past 5 years, I see a huge change, and we see a lot of online presence of Aipan as well and Aipan products. So, like I said, it is usually done on special occasions and life events. So festivals like Diwali, you make the Aipan then, and it has a lot of religious and cultural significance for the Kumaon people. So if we look at the elements of an Aipan, we can divide them into basically two styles or two components. One is the ritual component, which are traditional, and they are because they're associated with certain deities, or there are certain symbols like maybe a swastika or a conch shank symbol. So this ritual component, it will always remain the same. So for example, there are different chowkis. Chowkis are the seat where the deity is seated when you worship them. So the designs for those, they remain the same. So that is something which has been passed on through generations. But the decorative element is the one which can be personalized. So a lot of times what we see is the ritual element, it is going to be a fixed one, but the decorative one is where you can innovate and you can, you can embellish them, you can make freestyle designs. And apart from that, especially within the modern art form, like the lower image here in this page, so we see that they do not use the traditional or the ritual symbols or the ritual patterns. So that is one thing which I really like, that they have kept in mind, because a lot of times we see news articles where there's a picture of a deity, Indian deity or a Hindu deity in a foreigner's home, and then there's a ruckus over it and things like that. So the artists themselves are conscious enough of the fact that they don't want to they don't want to create that kind of problems, and so they themselves don't let the traditional or the ritual patterns be used for commercial purposes. So which is a very I think it's a very good thing in that sense. And materials, so traditionally naturally sourced materials from the forests or from their own pantries, women use those. So the background or the plain surface, like the reddish brownish surface part of the painting background, is made with geru, which is red orchard mud, which they get from the hills in their locality. And the white paint that they use to make the patterns is made from ground white rice. So you soak the rice overnight and then you ground it, and that is how you and then you make, using your fingers, you make the patterns on the on the orchard background. So the white paint is called biswar, and traditionally they would make it on what we call as silbatta, right? The traditional pestle and mortar. And one thing which is interesting is also that traditionally, because the homes were made with mud and wood and stones, so throughout the year the wear and tear would be greater than in probably a cement home. So they would also at times do a primer layer with cow dung and mud mixture, over which they'll put the geru, and then they'll make the patterns with the biswar. So this is how the patterns are made. And traditionally, for most women, it is not just painting or making an art form, it is also important ritually. So there are certain rules that they would follow. So they would usually, and because it is most commonly done during rituals and festivals, so they would get up early in the morning, they would take a bath and then prepare the materials, purify the area that they've selected to make the drawings, and then they would make the Aipan, because the art form in itself is a symbol of ritual purity, and it invokes the deities to bless the household and the people. So, and yes, another thing is that the beginning and the ending of an Aipan is usually it starts with the dot and it ends with the dot. So that is like so that's like it kind of depicts the circular form, the circular pattern of life. And so these are just a few examples. And yes, the white paint, usually in the traditional form, they make it very thin. So, it gets easily absorbed into the mud floor. So it doesn't get washed away, or it doesn't get wiped off very easily. And so the traditional spaces and objects that were used, that were where the Aipan were drawn, were usually the doorways, like in this traditional home that we see, the hearth, which is also called the than. That was the traditional place where the fire, like the place for the fire, the hearth of the home. And traditionally, food was also cooked there, but in recent times, we see that these two spots have been separated. And usually, houses, even in the hills, now have a separate temple or a separate place for the deity, and the kitchen is separated. So usually, the than is still decorated with the art form. Another is, like I said, the walls and the doorways of the household. And on Diwali, the souk, which is the winnowing fan, this was decorated to ward off evil spirits. Fool Day is a local, it's a spring festival in which kids, they go around, they collect flowers, and then they put flowers outside, their neighborhood, in their neighborhood homes and all. So for that, the baskets that the kids would use for collecting flowers would be decorated with Aipan designs. And another one is the pichora. In some places, because traditionally pichoras, which is a bridal shawl or a dupatta, it was made using, it would be made at home. So they would also make Aipan like designs on them. So these were the traditional spaces or objects where this was done. And now coming down to the religious significance, religion has a very high place in the Kumaoni society, and most people are Hindus, but they also practice traditional religions, indigenous religions, and they also worship local and ancestral deities. So in that sense, because the ritual has different patterns and different designs for different deities, so it forms like a like a religious database for all the deities, for all the different rituals, for different festivals, for even the different fasts that they have. So it is like a codified form of the religious practices of the region. And also because women traditionally were not a part of the education system, so I think it was a very important way for the younger women to learn about the religion more. So it was an informal form of education also. So I think that aspect of it was a means of instructions, a practical way of learning about your religion and about your deities and about your ritual practices. So we also see that in this way, women, because traditionally the region is a male dominated, the society is a male dominated one. So women, they don't hold positions of power within the religious domains. They will not be the ones who are in the forefront performing the rituals and all, but through rituals like Aipan, they have created their own space and their own importance in even male dominated spaces, like the religious practices. So that reflects their ingenuity and their skills and their ability to carve spaces for themselves where they cannot be denied from participation and creating their own practices. So this is an example of the traditional chowki, or the traditional the ritual designs. So all six of them are different, but the outer boundaries, that is the outer boundary is personalized by different artists or by different practitioners, but the central designs that we see in the core, they will not change. So this is one example of ritual Aipan. And as a socio-cultural practice, I think it reflects the socio-cultural structure in a lot of ways. It reflects how the gendered society works. The spaces are gendered, work is gendered in Kumaon. So Aipan also reflects that. At the same time, like previously also I mentioned, religious, like knowledge was not accessible to women that easily. So this was also, this was also a knowledge system that women developed for themselves. And like other things, like the guru shishya tradition that we have, or the master disciple systems through which men could learn, so women didn't have those. So this was one system where women could practically learn. Younger generations, like with their mothers, with their grandmothers, with their aunts, they would sit down, they would learn how to make things, they would develop those skills. So I think it is a very important way in which knowledge is being passed down, not just about the rituals, but also about what is available in your environment, what kind of materials are there, what kind of plants are there, resources. So that kind of information. Also, it reflects an important way in which social bonds, deeper social bonds and kinships were nurtured, and the bond between the elder and the younger generations were formed. It also depicted the deep connection that the women specifically have with the nature and the land of Kumaon. their identity is strongly connected with it, because for the women, the fields and the forests were the places where they could get their me time. It was a time where they could go out of the home, they could be there, nurture their friendships or other relationships outside of the household. So they would go with their friends to get the mud, or to get the to work in the fields, or to get the firewood and all. So it reflects that kind of importance of natural elements, of natural things and natural resources in their life. And it again also, like I said, the spaces are
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but you're running out of time. Could you please conclude?
Okay, yeah, sure. So this is the socio-cultural aspect of it. And I think I'll just move on to a few important points. So these are the newer forms of the art form which we can see. The newer products, there are cushions, there are coasters. So these are the kind of products, the new Aipan versus the old ones. And one issue is of two issues are main here. One is like the uniqueness versus mass production. So once this item becomes really popular, or the art form is easily accessible through internet and social media, so and often we see the cheap knockoffs come in, so that ways the artists are harmed. So one is that. And the other one is, even though this has been associated with empowerment of women, and women are the practitioners, but still the society is traditional. So what kind of control do they have over the monetary income that comes with the art form? So are they actually becoming financially empowered as well, or is this just another way in which they do add to the income of the household, but they do not have any say in the financial decisions? So these are like the two major issues that I saw. And internet and social media has really helped in developing the art form, because it has helped in one, it has connected the people who were interested in the art form and the performer and the creators of the art form. And it has also brought together, it has made businesses easier. So you see a lot of, there is one image somewhere here, I can't find it. So like if you even do a basic internet search on if you look at Instagram also, you see there are so many pages of businesses who are running on Aipan itself. So this way, I think internet and social media or new technologies have helped these art forms in becoming available to larger markets and to larger communities of not just consumers, but also lovers. And it also encourages people to to practice the art form and to include it in their daily life. I think, I think that is the basic of the paper. It is still a working paper, so I'm working on a bit of other parts of it. So yeah, if I think I can end here if that's fine.
Thank you so much, Reetika. We're sorry to cut you off, but
Not at all.
Okay. So we can move on to the next session. Next paper, I suppose. The next paper is by, I think sir is experiencing a few difficulties. I'll just introduce the next speaker. The next paper is titled Who Owns Folk Music? Exploring the Ownership of Assamese Folk Songs by Anandita Bora, who is a PhD scholar at the Special Center for the Study of Northeast India at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Over to you, Anandita.
Okay, I'll just share my screen. Is this visible? My PowerPoint?
Yeah, it's visible.
So I'll just. So good afternoon, everyone. The title of my paper is Who Owns Folk Music? Exploring the Ownership of Assamese Folk Music. So in this study, I'm basically dealing with the question of ownership in the context of Assamese Bihu music. And Bihu music is an integral part of Assamese culture and is performed during the Bihu festival time, which marks the Assamese New Year. And Bihu music is characterized by its energetic beats, rhythmic drumming, and lively lyrics that celebrate nature, love, and the coming of a new year. The objectives of my paper are firstly to explore how the concept of cultural appropriation intersect with the issue of ownership in folk music. Secondly, to analyze the concept of artistic freedom, creativity, and ownership in folk music. This research is based on interviews with musicians, scholars, and community members involved in the arena of Bihu music in Assam to gather insights on their perspective on ownership and identity. Moreover, a review of existing literature in the area of folk music, cultural ownership, and globalization is conducted to provide a theoretical framework for the research. This paper is divided into three sections. The first section is cultural appropriation and the minority culture. In this section, I'm going to examine the impact of cultural appropriation on minority cultures, including the ways in which it perpetuates stereotypes, erases cultural heritage, and reinforces power dynamics. By taking the case of Bollywood, I'm trying to show while Bollywood's appropriation can be seen as a form of appreciation and exposure for a lesser known musical style, it also is a form of cultural appropriation and exploitation. It is evident that artists from all cultures are continuously involved in cultural appropriation. Nevertheless, this process has also led to many controversy and debates in contemporary times. In his study, Jason argued that Bollywood filmmakers incorporate folk tunes into their films as a way to add a touch of authenticity and exoticism to their songs. Like other folk music, Assamese folk tunes are also incorporated in Bollywood movies. For example, the opening instrumental piece in the song Galti Se Mistake from Jagga Jasus movie is also borrowed from an Assamese Bihu tune, while the song Moja Moja from Jab We Met also include a piece of an Assamese song, that is Ali Kati Jalidim Borpira Paridim Tate Bohi Rodde. So by taking the traditional musical style like Bihu tunes and repackaging it for a mainstream audience, Bollywood runs the risk of diluting the authenticity and cultural significance of the music. Moreover, the artists and communities who have preserved and passed down these musical traditions for generations may not receive due credit for their contributions. During the interview, an Assamese folk musician, 54 years old, he stated, within quote, "While I appreciate the effort to showcase our traditional music to a larger audience, I feel that the essence of Assamese folk music is often commercialized in Bollywood. The intricate rhythms, melodious tunes, and meaningful lyrics that are the hallmark of our folk songs are often overshadowed by flashy choreography and excessive use of electronic beats. Hence, it is important to consider the power dynamics at play when discussing the ownership of folk music in the context of cultural appropriation. The next part is sharing property and commodification, exploring Assamese Bihu music. In this section, I have shown how Bihu music as a collective activity has transformed to a commodity in recent time. As R. Harris writes, when folk music that is local and unwritten transform into a tangible commodity, when it is written down, and especially when it takes the form of recorded sound and becomes an article to be manipulated, bought, and sold. Under capitalism, the value of music is often determined primarily by its marketability and profitability, and this can lead to potential issues of exploitation and appropriation of traditional folk music. In the pursuit of profit, music with historical and cultural significance may be commercialized and appropriated without proper recognition or compensation to the communities from which it originated. Traditionally, Bihu performed as a collective activity, and there are many forms of Bihu dance performances, such as Husori, performed in the courtyard of the villagers; Mukoli Bihu, the form of Bihu dance, performed in an open space with boys and girls; Jang Bihu, mostly performed by women in an open space; Rati Bihu, performed during the night only by women; Gostolar Bihu, performed under a tree, almost similar to Mukoli Bihu. Among all of these performances, Husori is still popular. From the interview, it is observed that the musicians engaged with Bihu performance often find a sense of community belonging, and it is because folk music is traditionally passed down through generations within close knit communities. However, in recent years, there has been a growing trend towards the commodification of Assamese Bihu music. With the rise of digital platforms and the music industry, folk artists are increasingly being encouraged to commercialize their music for a wider audience, and this has led to a shift in the way folk music is produced, marketed, and consumed. Also, in recent years, the use of electronic instruments has become more prevalent in the performance of Bihu music, uh, which add a modern twist to this traditional art form. The next section is owning music, artistic freedom in the modern Bihu composition. In this section, I have shown how Assamese musicians navigate the demand of rapidly globalizing world, at the same time recognizing the community ownership of Bihu music. With the advent of technology and globalization, there has been a shift towards creating more contemporary and innovative composition that blend traditional Bihu elements with modern influences such as electronic music and fusion genres. And this evolution has raised questions about who owns the right to create and perform modern Bihu compositions. In the interview, some participants argued that the traditional Bihu songs and dances are part of the cultural heritage of Assam and should be preserved in their original form, while others believe that artists should have the freedom to experiment and create new interpretations of Bihu music. I interviewed a few musicians who used folk tunes in their music compositions. A musician, 37 years old male, he stated, within quote, I believe that folk music belongs to the people and is a part of our cultural heritage. While I may use traditional folk tunes in my modern compositions, I always try to give credit to the original source, and I see it as a way of continuing the tradition and keeping the music alive for future generations. In addition to cultural preservation, using folk tunes in modern composition can also add a unique and authentic flavor to the music. The distinct sound of traditional instruments and vocal styles can create a sense of nostalgia and authenticity that resonates with listeners. By incorporating Bihu-based songs into their compositions, Assamese musicians can cater to the market demand for traditional as well as culturally relevant music. In an interview with a prominent Assamese musician, 46 years old, he stated, within quote, the use of folk tunes, especially Bihu-based songs, in our modern compositions is a deliberate choice. The market demand for such song is high, as people are always looking for music that is both traditional and contemporary. And by blending these two elements, we can create a sound that is uniquely Assamese and attract a wide range of listeners. As Assamese musicians embark on the journey of incorporating folk tunes into their compositions, they are also faced with the issue of ownership. Under copyright law, individual can assert their rights over their original music creations, providing them with legal protection against unauthorized use. And this form of individual ownership allows musicians to earn recognition and financial compensation for their work, providing them with the incentive to continue creating music. Beyond the legal framework of copyright law, Assamese musicians also hold a form of symbolic ownership over their folk music traditions. And in this context, one participant stated, new Bihu compositions may have been created by a single person, but it had to have been later assimilated into a community's unwritten living heritage. Now come to the conclusion part. Through this paper, I have discussed the process of cultural appropriation and commodification and how it is related to the question of the ownership of Bihu music in recent times. In the present, age, the SMS community has faced questions such as who has the authority to interpret and present these musical traditions and who gets to profit. Looking at the case of Bollywood appropriation of Assamese folk music, that is where non-Assamese artists appropriate and commercialize traditional folk songs without properly crediting or compensating their original creators. Therefore, the question of who has the right to represent and profit from Assamese folk music raises complex ethical and legal considerations. While from the legal point of view, the copyright system based on individual rights may be seen as inadequate in protecting the ownership of Bihu music or folk music in general. However, Assamese musicians are able to protect their creations as well as acknowledging the community ownership of the folk music they are drawing inspiration from. And in this way, Assamese musicians are showing respect for their cultural roots and ensuring that the tradition and history of their community are preserved and respected. Hence, the recognition of community ownership of folk music by Assamese musicians highlights the importance of honoring cultural heritage while also embracing creativity and innovation in music in contemporary times. And it can be seen as a balancing act between tradition and modernity that ultimately benefits both the artists and their community. That is all about my today's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anamrita.
Thank you, Anandita, for this very insightful paper. The next paper that we have is titled Balancing Tradition and Trend, Policy and Method Dynamics in Indian Folklore, a promotion for cultural heritage tourism by Pratibhas Chaudhury, who is an undergraduate student at the Sanskrit College and University. Pratibhas, over to you.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. Presenting. Is it visible?
Yeah, it's visible.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pratibhas from Sanskrit College and University. I'm an undergraduate student. It's my first paper presentation, so I'm a bit nervous. Today's topic is balancing tradition and trend, policy and method dynamics in Indian folklore promotion for cultural heritage tourism. We have already discussed a lot about the cultural background. So my point of view will be more about the legislative framework and the administrative policies which India has taken, primarily focusing on India, has taken over the 75 years or more than 75 years of independence. So cultural heritage tourism in South Asian countries highly intertwines with folklore. But the problem which comes up with the methodological and administrative ways taken by the government as well as the individual to understand the folklore. It underscores the silent transmission of folklore traditional and the governmental efforts to preserve them. However, the advent of digital media poses a new challenges, potentially diluting ethnic folk culture. So first of all, what happens understanding the folklore, Dande, which he believes that folk is a flexible concept, and especially for South Asia, we have to acknowledge the folk being a diverse concept as there are several aspects associating with folk and their laws. William Wilson also points out that things people make with words as well as their hands, the material culture, and the things they made with their action, the customary folklores. In that section, WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, also made a model provision in the section 2 of it. They sectionalizes the folklores as 4 parts: vowel, musical, action-based, and the tangible forms, which includes the material culture too, which we need to protect, not only the intangible cultures, but also the material culture. This folklore um, in the South Asia has a problem, as the study of ethnographic folk lore started very late, nearly in the late 20th century. So what happened, that the former Indologists, they believed in the um, oral tradition of folklores, which primarily engages to the proverbs and the stories. But afterwards, when the folk tradition um, comes into the concept of American standards, and there are several other backgrounds which it should include. And in the meantime, the globalization starts, and there are 2 primary influences we can categorize, that is foreign and indigenous influences, and that can be subcategorized as hybrid entertainment, immoral commercialization, propaganda manipulation, and the digital world effects, homogenization, and lack of community awareness, which I think in that case, Arjun Appadurai has cautiously argued that the globalizing cultural forces of media and communication produce complex interactions and disjunctures between the different cultures, where there are 5 scapes which influence culture, and argues that these factors ensure cultural diversity and not cultural homogeneity and domination. But still, that cannot be neglected, that this globalization made the folk in a question that how much authentic or how much invented the folklore is. In the context, Professor Dawson termed the folklore in the late 20th century, which he believes that a Disneyfication of folk tradition or anything which is less than genuine cannot be considered as a folklore. This folklore is a synthetic product claiming to be authentic, which in the Bunyan and the Watkins understanding is totally confined into the oral traditions. But if we come into South Asia, we can find that these folklores, which the American perspective can consider as folklore, but the problem that as there are several colonial dominance as well as the globalization impacts, the folklore transforms very naturally, and these transformations cannot easily be undertaken or neglected. That will obviously be considered and should be considered by the folklorists, because to directly dissect those, that cannot be possible. To understand that folklore heritage of South Asia, we can have 2 forms understandable by UNESCO, that is tangible and intangible folklore, which both can be categorized as urban and rural, especially for India. I have taken 2 different aspects. One is for the tangible folklore and one is for the intangible folklore. Now, the intangible folklore, we have discussed a lot about it, but these intangible folklores like the musical and the verbal expressions have been influenced or been cultured in the 21st century and has changed that the Bollywoodification of the wedding traditions. But specifically talking about the weddings. Why weddings? Because wedding has several cultural practices, especially by the woman of the society, who promotes the folklore generation by generation. Now the generation, talking about the generation, there can be three category in the generations. One is primarily, which includes our grandparents. Why? Because they are mostly aware of those traditions very properly or near to properly. And now afterwards, our parents who where somehow the has a very colonized mentality, born or raised under a colonial system, or the post-colonial system, they have a distorted facts or about the folklores. And in case of our generation, there are several impacts, and there the question comes whether we are talking about folklores or fakelores. Then coming into the music, as we have talked about musics a lot, I'm not going to taking more time in music, because yes, the musical expressions of India currently is going through a challenge also. In a paper by St. John College's professors, there are 3 professors who made a paper on Naga music industry, which has been suffering through various factors. One is absence of robust platform and the mismatch of fusion forms with preferences of the older generation and the younger generation who seeks modernization. So this modernization primarily takes up the older traditions, and there are several musical instruments in the Naga music art form which are not even made today, or there are no chances to make them today, as there are several complications with it. Talking about music, not only music, talking about the tribal culture and their folklore transitions, there are also events. In a personal interview of someone known to me, I have come to know that in Santhali culture, the marriage has gone through several changes nowadays, that the decorations and the traditions which they have followed back like 10-20 years ago, they are not even following that. They're after their latter generations are not following that. Now what is the problem with this intangible culture and the protection of them by the government? The government has very specific understanding towards the culture. There are lots of constitutional wordings, but they are not even implemented properly by the governance. In the colonial era, we can find that there are several political, there are several cultural and cultural preservation acts, like Indian Treasure Trove Act 1878, which talks about preservation. But this preservation does not go as it like today, because there are not the proper idea which we should take, as there are lack of knowledge towards the folklore. Now, talking about the urban culture, that urban folklores primarily concerns the tangible culture, tangible folklore, which also includes the our heritage properties, which nowadays goes through several problems. First of all, there are inadequate planning for the heritage sites. As we know that in Delhi and in Lucknow as well as in Kolkata, there are several heritage sites which are...
Pratibhas, I hate to interrupt you, but I'd like you to conclude in 1 minute. We have another paper presentation after this, and we want to leave 5 minutes for discussion.
Okay. So there are inadequate planning towards the preservation of heritage sites, and we can find then that ASI, Archaeological Survey of India, who are entitled to preserve those acts, those property, has also gone through several problems that there are several sister organization has been made in the latter parts, which has several discrete mediators and with various political influences. Now, talking about how can we solve these problems, that we need a folklorist. Who is a folklorist? That the idea of a folklorist is very needed in South Asia, which comprises several attributes of the folklorists, who can be a researcher and an interpreter, documentarian, culturalist, and preservationist. In Lyndon Montel's interview, he talked about the folklorist as a whole worker who can be in several organizations funded by government as well as the private organizations to think about the heritage of the nation. And this can foster the idea of balancing the trend and the tradition to keep it. Like in, if we're talking about Nepal, we can find that the properties are highly damaged in the earthquakes. And in rebuilding these artifacts, there are several these antiquities which has been made by the engineers who are not even aware of the folk culture. So the folklorist can be the problem solver for every aspect of problems. I think that's all.
Thank you so much, Pratibhas. We really hated to interrupt you since your paper was so engaging. However, that is the way of conferences. We're really sorry. However, we'd like to proceed to the next and the last paper for today, which is titled Curating the Folk, National Museums and the Construction of Cultural Identity by Vijayashree, who's a doctoral scholar at National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bengaluru. Over to you, Vijayashree.
Hi, thank you. Let me quickly share the PPT. And because the internet is a little patchy, I will be turning off my camera, so I hope that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all right.
Give me 1 second.
Is there an issue with the screen sharing?
Vijayashree, would you like us to share the screen? You're muted.
Yes, you can hear me now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you.
I shall share the screen.
Okay.
It's visible, I hope.
Yeah, it's visible now.
Okay. Thank you for bearing with me when that technical glitch was being fixed. And before I begin, I want to congratulate the organizers. I can only imagine how difficult it must have been to put together so many talks over 3 days. So it's a formidable task. I congratulate all you people for organizing this much needed conference. And the title for my talk today is Curating the Folk, National Museums and the Construction of Cultural Identity. The work I present is part of my larger PhD work, which looks at the contemporary lives of ritual objects from their sites of production to their various ways of circulation and consumption. And in my PhD work, I look at particular ritual objects associated with a particular tradition called the Bhutaradhane tradition that happens in coastal Karnataka. And the work I am presenting here is a very small but a very integral aspect of my larger PhD work. So in this talk, I examine the discursive formation of the category of folk and flag the various debates around it by foregrounding the arguments that critically look at folk as an academic construct. I try to challenge the categorization of Bhuta masks and sculptures as folk in both pedagogic and museum spaces. To this end, I draw on ethnographic research I conducted in 2 national level museums in India and problematize the staging of Bhuta masks and sculptures as folk objects. Now, before I begin, let me quickly give an overview of the Bhutaradhane tradition. The pantheistic tradition of Bhutaradhane or spirit worship, which is practiced in the Tulunadu region of coastal Karnataka, particularly in the districts of Udupi and Dakshina Kannada, is a tradition where various kinds of spirits, ancestors, heroes, totem, animals are venerated. And the tradition itself is known for its dramatic ritual, visual, and material elements. The unique metal masks and wooden sculptures, which you can see on the screen here, images of both, these unique metal masks and wooden sculptures are an integral part of the Bhuta ritual, and now they have traveled to other sites and contexts where they're endowed with new meanings and values. Notably, the Bhuta masks and sculptures have a prominent presence in museums across the country and several important museums in the world too, where their artistic qualities are highlighted and are generally classified as folk objects. They're also advertised as folk objects in art and tourist markets, in contrast to the ritual objects associated with the Hindu temples that tend to be classified as classical art. The category of folk has a long history in India and across the world, one that is closely associated with colonialism and the disciplines of anthropology and folklore studies. Within the discipline of art history in India, which draws predominantly from Western aesthetic paradigms, folk art is understood as a collective tradition that has operated outside the parameters of canonical art conventions. Now, modeled on Western art historical constructs of high and low art, classical art, primitive art, and avant-garde, in India, a hierarchical dichotomy between classical and folk art was constructed. Folk then was understood as a non-mainstream imagination of a mythological universe expressed through a variety of alternate artistic forms which did not necessarily comply with dominant aesthetics and canonical norms by communities seemingly outside the dominant cultural tradition. Pedagogic and curatorial practices in Indian museums with their colonial genealogy tend to reiterate this praxis. Now, before I present my case studies, let me quickly discuss the academic debates around the category of folk. The classical folk art dichotomy has been criticized by several scholars who show how these categories were politically and historically constructed. As in the notion of folklore in Europe, the concept of folk was employed as an instrument in cultural movements to further the project of Indian nationalism in the 19th and 20th century. Several scholars have also problematized the cataloging of material cultures associated with indigenous and tribal communities as either folk, tribal, or ethnographic objects. Now, the term ethnographic objects, sometimes used as an alternative to folk objects, is also a legacy of colonial anthropology. In anthropological museums, ethnographic objects are those derived primarily from non-Western cultures, which reflected the politics of imperialism and colonialism. The rhetoric of the colonial anthropological museum, based on othering and exoticizing certain communities and cultures, was reproduced in the Indian museums as well. where these objects took on the form of folk or ethnographic collection. Now, objects with a historical, religious, art, or aesthetic character, or even objects of quotidian use, were transformed into exhibits when they were brought into museum settings or private collections. Such objects are often aestheticized as art through various apparatus at the disposal of museums. In the post-independence era, the revival of craft traditions was pursued as a national policy and was even addressed in the 5-year plans. The government attempted to provide institutional support, finance, protection, and new markets to the craft community. Now, within the discipline of art history, like I mentioned earlier, artifacts that did not conform to a Euro-American understanding of art, aesthetics, and beauty were brought under the umbrella term of folk art. The categories of folk and craft have come under, like discussed before, have come under critical radar of scholars who have challenged the binary dichotomies of art and craft and suggest that these categories were artificially created in the academic and political circles. Scholars like Roma Chatterjee and Soumya Venkatesan argue that craft worlds of elite intellectuals, scholars, policymakers, and social workers have worked together to configure the heterotopia of traditional Indian craft, and that the producers of such crafts are framed within the category of craft community. However, I must admit that negotiating an alternate term for folk art or craft has remained a challenge for the heritage community. With this understanding in mind, I want to now plunge into the case studies where I present the field work I did in 2 national level museums and try to locate these case studies within the larger conceptual framework I just outlined. The first museum I look at is the National Handicrafts and Handlooms Museum, which is popularly known as the Crafts Museum, which is a high-profile, well-funded museum which cater to both national and international visitors in New Delhi, and is one of the premier cultural institutions in the country. Designed by the celebrated architect Charles Correa, the museum is under the aegis of Ministry of Culture, and with an extensive collection of more than 30,000 objects, the museum offers a specified narrative of folk and tribal cultures. The Bhuta Gallery is one of the strongholds of this museum. Here we have 29 Bhuta wooden sculptures which are exhibited in a dedicated gallery, and the rest are kept in their reserve collection. While researching the history of Bhuta collections in this museum, I came across 2 enthralling accounts narrated to me by my interlocutors, one an official at the museum and other a local scholar in Tulunadu where I conducted my fieldwork. According to the museum official in Delhi, the Bhuta sculptures were collected in 3 stages. The first consignment arrived in 1966 because of the efforts of Kamala Devi Chattopadhyaya, who we all know is a driving force behind reviving craft traditions in post-colonial India. In her quest to collect objects for the newly established Museum on Craft Heritage, she conducted expeditions across the country. During one such journey in coastal Karnataka, she witnessed Bhuta wooden sculptures being disposed of in the sea. Upon having her request refused by Hindu fishermen in Udupi who believed in the magico-religious powers of these sculptures, she hired Muslim fishermen from Kundapur to venture into the sea and collect them. Another interlocutor of mine from Udupi corroborated this account and told me about the arduous journey of these Bhuta sculptures from Tulunadu to Delhi. According to him, the vehicle transporting the sculptures met with 2 road accidents at different stages. The first accident caused the death of the driver, and the second caused serious injuries to the helper. An analogous yet slightly different record of this morbid journey of Bhuta sculptures is provided by Jyotinder Jain in one of his writings. I suspect that the narratives about this long-winded trajectory of the Bhuta sculptures at the museum and the macabre story that is built around it about the loss of lives during the sculpture's journey is often repeated to add to the sense of enigma and mystique that surrounds these objects. The visitors in this museum, through ocular and auditory modes, experience a form of curated ethnicity in the museum space. The National Handicrafts and Handlooms Museum, or the Craft Museum, with its location in the country's capital, is engaged in the nation-building project of post-colonial India. The museum was entrusted with the task of displaying the cultural plurality to legitimize the newly formed Indian state. To this end, the museum constructed the notion of ethnicity by lodging together various cultures under a homogeneous rubric of folk and tribal art. This endeavor upholds the perception of culture devoid of nuances and internal contradictions, failing to acknowledge the inherent heterogeneity and multifaceted nature of cultural expressions. The newly developed philosophy of craft heritage and the Craft Museum worked in tandem to construct and promote social cohesion and ethnicity and situated these processes in the discourse of national identity. In this process, the museum downplays differences and pushes out the interiorized identities to overstate the culture of the dominant as the identity of the whole. The museum movement in India had an Orientalist beginning, where folk and tribal ethnographic objects were collected along with archaeological and other material objects. Colonial ethnography categorized these objects as separate from the mainstream cultures of Indian civilization. The display of the ethnographic objects in the Craft Museum tends to replicate this colonial tradition. These images on the screen shows how the Bhuta objects that were collected in 3 different stages are exhibited in the galleries of the Craft Museum in Delhi. And now I turn to the second case study, which is of another national level museum called the Indira Gandhi Rashtriya Manav Sangrahalaya at Bhopal, which is an open air museum. Now spread over a sprawling campus of 200 acres, the museum was established as a space, as it claims, to celebrate the simultaneous validity of various valuable cultural patterns evolved over thousands of years. This cultural institution developed in various stages with the construction of indoor galleries and outdoor open-air in-situ exhibitions. In 2008 and 2010, the South Regional Center of the Museum at Mysore commissioned craftsmen from Tulunadu to replicate the Bhuta wooden sculptures found at Nandikeshwara Temple in Mekekattu. Now, the Nandikeshwara Temple in Mekekattu, which is a small hamlet in the Udupi district, has a vast collection of Bhuta sculptures installed in a closed hall within its temple complex. A structure similar to the one at Mekekattu was constructed in the mythological trial exhibit at the museum to display these sculptures. A group of priests were brought in from Udupi to perform the installation rituals, and the exhibit became available to public viewing in 2017. A total of 41 Bhuta wooden sculptures are exhibited here. Now, according to the curator of this exhibit, the mythological trial gallery tries to bring forth the myths, rituals, and belief systems of various folks and tribal cultures, and thereby present a worldview parallel to the mainstream cultures. The location of the Bhuta wooden sculptures within this exhibit seems most apt. The museum has attempted to present the Bhuta objects in situ. Their location amid other installations that chronicle the origin myths of various ethnic communities shifts the focus away from the folk character that is attributed to these objects in other institutionalized narratives. Instead, here the Tulu cosmology and belief systems are amplified. Their exhibition here is a sharp contrast to what we find in the Craft Museum. In the Craft Museum, the Bhuta sculptures are displayed as separate exhibits in a closed hall with gallery lights designed to highlight the aesthetic properties of the individual objects. Whereas in IGRMS, these sculptures are grouped as a whole and are not presented as individual objects, which according to the curator would make the visitors think about where they come from, what they mean, and the larger belief systems that has produced these objects. Though the 2 national museums I studied, the Craft Museum in Delhi and the IGRMS in the Indira Gandhi Rashtriya Manav Sangrahalaya in Bhopal, share a similar character as places for promoting and safeguarding cultural heritage. They're strikingly different in matters of authorship. In the Craft Museum,
Vijayashree, I'm so sorry, but you have to wrap up your presentation.
Yes, I'm finishing.
Yeah.
In the Craft Museum, an esoteric group of museum experts present carefully selected aesthetically appealing cultural materials as folk and tribal art. In this process, they perpetuate the colonial narrative. Whereas in IGRMS, through innovative models of co-curation and exchange of cultural knowledge between the community and the museum is trying to attempt decolonizing the narratives around Bhuta tradition. However, both museums frame the Buddha masks and sculptures as folk or craft objects. The classification of Buddha objects as folk in these museums reduces the plurality of narratives and historical complexities that exist in relation to the tradition of Bhutaradhane into a simplified, homogenized grouping. Further, the decontextualized displays and curatorial practices that reinforce existing stereotypes about folk culture forestall a deeper exploration of the specific histories or communities linked to the tradition, further marginalizing the non-dominant communities associated with the Bhutaradhane tradition. Through this talk, I've tried to demonstrate that the concepts and narratives of folk are not just abstract categories, but also fundamentally determine the exhibition and perceptions in the museum settings. I want to conclude by arguing that the authorized representation presented in these museums tend to gloss over a recognition of the plurality of beliefs and practices inherent in the Buddha tradition. This limitation stems from the selective foregrounding of dominant voices and the marginalization of other perspectives, which result in an incomplete or homogeneous misrepresentation of the Buddha heritage within these institutional settings. With this, I would end my talk. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Vijayashree, for that very interesting paper. Dr. Fayaz Ahmed had to leave due to some prior commitments, but I would like to hand over the chairing responsibilities to my friend Bhumika, who is also a coordinator of this conference. Over to you.
Yeah. I hope I'm audible to everyone.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for presenting such lovely papers. And we were very excited since the time we received your abstracts, and your presentations was literally like the silver lining for this particular sessions. And each of you represented a different aspect of the theme that we went for. And I really want to like I made a special note for Pratibhas for using such interesting fonts from Canva for his presentation. And Anandita, your like I have been working on Assamese folk songs as well, but particularly different category, not the Bihu music. But it was really interesting to hear about that segment as well. And you really touched upon a lot of community-related issues as well there. It would be really interesting if you could expand further on it in a different paper. Thank you so much for sharing those insights. And also, it would be interesting if you could play a segment of those musical compositions. That way, it makes it more interactive as well. Because I really wanted to listen to those. But nonetheless, a wonderful paper.
Thank you.
And you're welcome. And Reetika, thank you so much for talking about Aipan art. I had only heard about Aipan art through Meghal, because she is also working on Kumaon culture. And I was really interested, like I had this question particularly for your presentation, since Aipan art within itself is a traditional art form. But now every traditional art form is being commercialized. And I met Hemlata Kabzuwal. I'm pretty sure you know about her. She's one of the artists, Aipan artists, who's been commercializing a lot of Aipan art into different types of like utility-based art-related things.
I'm sorry for interrupting. I didn't hear the name properly.
Hemlata Kabzuwal.
Hemlata. I know about there are a few artists who are doing that, and actually there's a growing it has become a trend now. Like if you go through people's Instagrams or Facebook profiles, everyone and anyone is trying to jump in on this, and to maybe monetize this, which kind of annoys me to some extent. Okay. Please continue. Yeah,
that was my question. Like, what do you feel about the commercialization aspect of it, since it's a very, if not very, but a sacred and traditional art form within itself. It has its own innocence, and once it's commercialized, it becomes something else entirely. So that was one thing that I would love to know about it, if probably after this session, since we're running out of time. And Vijayashree, thank you so much for like this was a paper I really wanted to sit through. And I'm really sorry we had to cut you short for this one. And it was really interesting how you looked at both of the um, museums, like two people. You found out the similarities, like a shared dialogue between those places and how art is represented in each of those places. And having visited the Handloom Museum myself, I could see like what you were trying to say with some of the interesting dichotomy aspect of classical and folk art. And also, like how I wanted to ask you about how what is the difference in how an artist and a commoner they interact with these spaces, because it is always different when an artist walks into such spaces or a researcher walks into the space, and also for people who are like school students when they go to museums and art spaces, and what kind of impact it has on them. Like it's very different, and there's a range of impact it causes. And definitely interesting paper. Thank you so much to everyone. I would thank Vijay, even though he's not there for chairing this session, and a big thanks to Meghal for making sure that everything works smoothly. Uh, this wouldn't have been possible without any if anybody would have faltered. So everyone made all the efforts, and especially Meghal and all the presenters. Thank you so much for a wonderful paper. We would
I
love to have
also
you next time as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I also want to extend a big thank you to our volunteers, Sobanvita, Swayamsiddha, and Monani for making sure that everything functions according to the schedule. Thank you so much. This conference truly wouldn't be possible without your continuous effort. And thank you to all the presenters. This truly was a very wonderful session. I am bursting with questions myself, but I hope that I can connect with you all personally and take it forward. We now will begin with the documentary session. We will screen a documentary titled A Serious Wedding, and we request all of you to stay tuned and watch it, and we have an interaction with the film director as well. Thank you so much. We will in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.